He's the prime Camark.
Salutations, my name is Kevin Perjurer, and welcome to another edition in Defunctland. For
Hey, Kevin.
background/context on this series, please visit thepurge.com with the link below. Today we will be
Hey, you
attempting
get
to
some
resurrect our first non-Disney attraction, Jaws the
The
Ride,
Tier 1
that
Zillow
operated
Trance.
in Universal Studios Florida from 1990 to 2012. This is also our first viewer-suggested addition to the park, so thank you to Cinematic Psycho Productions for the comment. To all of you Disney fanatics that don't care about
Makes it Tier
Universal
1, Jimmy.
Studios, stick with me, because there will be plenty of Disney history weaved throughout the story.
Universal
let's
is
get
so
into
much
it.
better than
In
Disney,
the
though.
mid-1960s,
Disney
Universal,
fucking
who
sucks
at the
unless you
time
just
was owned
love
by
Disney
multimedia
movies.
company MCA, completely refurbished the Universal Studios tour, creating the beginning of Universal Studios Hollywood as we know it today.
Thanks, Reese.
This put them in
Dits
direct
and throw it
competition
away.
with other LA-based amusement
Hey, Year,
park,
thank you.
Disneyland. As
Thanks for bits
Universal
weaving.
Studios Hollywood continued to add additions to their park, including a Jaws encounter during the studio tour, MCA kept a close eye on Disney. When word got around that Disney was planning on operating a new theme park in Florida, MCA followed closely behind, with a new
Yeah,
studio
fuck
tour
yeah.
in Orlando in an attempt to attract some of the tourists that would be traveling to Walt Disney World. This began
Thanks
the
to resub
ongoing
Nut,
feud between
Hyper,
Universal Studios
Crispy,
and Disney. I won't dive fully
and
into the
Peak.
feud, as I would be touching on the
I
history of
always watch
future
Ordinary
Defunctland
Sausage.
attractions, but just to give you an idea, yeah, they're basically the same thing. So Disney MGM
Except
Studios
Universal's
began
much better.
construction in 1985, obviously angering Universal as Disney had copied many aspects of their plan and already existing park. However, luckily for Universal and MCA, they had recently found a developer for their Orlando park. They had also found a creative partner, Steven Spielberg. That's
Hey,
right.
good
If you watched
guy.
the first episode
Good
of
guy to
Defunctland,
have on your
you'll
team.
remember that George Lucas was heavily involved in the development of attractions for Disney at this time. And if you don't already
He's a
know,
prime
George
tie.
Lucas and Steven Spielberg are very close friends, who found themselves in competition with one another in the late 1980s due to this feud. Universal decided not to make their Orlando park the same as their Hollywood tram tour out of fear of being accused of copying Disney. They decided to instead focus more on film-based attractions, such as Confrontation and Jaws the Ride. The creative head of Universal
Jaws
Studios
was one of the first
Florida
ones?
was
I didn't
former
know that.
Disney Imagineer and Steven Spielberg's college roommate, Peter
Ride sucks.
Alexander.
Sucked.
Universal had no
That now.
experience creating epic attractions like Disney's, so the management was worried about the concept of the Florida park. Alexander spearheaded the ride, and Ride and Show Engineering agreed to produce it.
Thanks to resub
The first
Liv,
version of
Pax,
the ride
Toe,
cost
and
$30
Gladdy.
million to make
Two
in the
gift
late
subs, Ryan.
1980s, which,
Thank you, Ryan.
factoring in inflation, yeah, it was expensive, and the results were interesting. The original Jaws ride took guests on a pontoon boat captained by a employee who would guide the boat on a tour of Amity, the town in Jaws.
Yeah.
And shockingly, the guests spot a
Shark! 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 Shark!
The most exciting
shark
thing that
would
ever
then stalk
happened
you
on
for
this
the rest
ride
of
is
the
when I
ride,
almost fell
even
off.
appearing in the boathouse
That's
that you're
literally
hiding
the
out in.
only like
In the
exciting
first
moment
version
of this
the
ride I
at
ever
one point,
experienced.
the robot shark would actually take a bite out of the boat and attempt to spin it. This would have been amazing, except for it almost never worked correctly. Like the robot made for the movie Jaws, the Jaws ride sharks experienced a variety of problems. First, sometimes the robot shark would not lunge out of the
There's
water
Prime
to
Crimson
grab
and
the
resub
boat.
Jan.
Second, if it did, the robot's shark teeth would sometimes damage the boat because for some reason they used real shark teeth. In the finale of the original ride, the skipper would shoot the shark with a grenade launcher. It would then explode and chunks of shark would fly out of the water.
Yeah, I remember
It would
that.
fly out of a small air cannon and then would be filtered back in and recirculated. The sharks were guided by computers and could swim at 20 feet per second. It was an impressive ride, but did it work as they had planned? No.
Fuck no.
The answer is no.
That shit. When you got on the Jaws ride back in my day, what you were doing is just taking a boat ride to just relax. Literally nothing would happen, and
As
half
we
the time
stroll
your
through
boat
the
guide
streets
wouldn't
of
say a
Amity,
word.
This little New England village seems like any
This shit was
seaside
terrible.
resort in summer. Young men thronging around the shooting gallery, people basking in the sun, crowds taking photographs
Thanks to
of
resub
a great
Stewie,
white
Heisenberg,
shark.
and Decomposed, and Scott Steiner.
White shark. But this is a movie set.
The Mummy,
This
the Mummy
where
ride is still good.
Jaws turns an elemental fear of the water
I think it's a big wiener.
to screaming terror. But today the sea is calm. It's a good day for a boat ride.
Jesus Christ! Good lord!
MGM Studios opened on May 1st, 1989, and a year later, Universal
What they should have done is just put
Studios
real
Florida
sharks
opened
in
on
there.
June 7th,
Fuck it.
1990. Opening day was a star-studded
Not that they
event.
do anything,
Celebrities
even if
such
they
as
were real, I
Sylvester
mean,
Stallone,
just
Steven
fucking swim
Spielberg,
around.
and Bill Cosby were in attendance. The opening was a huge success for people that like to watch everything go wrong.
I hope this cuts. This is a lot thicker than what we rehearsed with.
The power went out just hours before the opening. Many of the attraction's automation systems weren't operating, and Jaws had to shut down due to a thunderstorm after a few hours of operation.
Oh, no.
Steven Spielberg was rumored to be stuck on the ride during this time. The following few days of opening did not go much better. Jaws was still not operating correctly.
Good.
One skipper was quoted as saying, "Imagine explosions over there." These problems would continue with the ride. At times,
Is it
Universal
prime
would
corn?
inform guests in the morning that Jaws would not be open that day, regardless of whether it was or not. Universal tried to stay positive
I'll
about
check it
the
out, Peter,
ride,
sure.
but it became apparent that it wasn't operating properly. On top of this, they would be faced with a lawsuit as during one voyage, a guest fell off the boat
Yeah.
into the water with Jaws. He was on a family trip with his children and
Yeah.
were obviously mortified that their father would be eaten. Worse, he fell in one of the 10 feet deep areas where the sharks are held. The other areas of the ride were
Oh,
only 4 feet deep. If you haven't figured it out already, this means that he was incredibly close to the mechanics of the ride. He even recalled that the shark was swimming right toward him. When the
God
employee managed to
damn.
get him back on the boat, the other guests clapped, thinking it was all just part of the show. He sued Universal for $1 million.
That's it?
This, along with the fact that the
I'd go for
ride
10.
shut down almost daily, helped Universal come to the conclusion that it was time to drastically change the ride. The original version of Jaws closed after only 2.5 months of operation. It is safe to say that Universal and MCA were mad. They sued Ride and Show Engineering for not designing the ride properly. Ride and Show claimed that their handiwork was not at fault, and that Universal did not give them enough time. Ride and Show
That's
even
probably
said
true.
that they were looking forward to the case, so that they could prove that Universal messed up and not them. They later settled out of court, with Ride and Show commenting, "Basically, Universal didn't have any experience with a ride like this. If we had built something like this for Disneyland, Disneyland maintenance would have
Oh.
taken it over and made it work." Oh
A
no,
dagger.
they didn't. Universal was now determined
Thanks,
to get
Reese,
Jaws
knocked
operating
Lucy,
correctly
Taco,
as
and the
soon
Prime
as possible.
Muscles.
And after more delays and more problems, they
I have
finally
seen those,
settled on a
Furby.
1993 opening date. They hired Totally
Yeah, it's at
Fun
the
Company
Indioba.
to redesign the ride.
My
A
favorite
company
ride at
started
Universal
by
is Men in
Peter
Black.
Alexander. They also hired a variety of contractors to complete the many different aspects of the attraction to ensure that it was done correctly the second time around. The new story incorporated elements from both Jaws and Jaws 2. In the new ride, the
Shark! 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 Shark!
Oh, fuck!
would not bite the boat or be blown to pieces, but there would instead be a gas explosion, and the shark would be killed after it bit a high voltage wire, such as in the end of Jaws 2. This was Peter Alexander's final suggestion before he left the project to go to the other end of the park and produce shows for
I don't think I ever
Nickelodeon Studios.
wrote it when it was
The
like
fire
that, to
scene
be
would have
honest.
be impressive,
I only remember
and
the original.
Pyrotechnics testing it purposefully designed it so that the guests could feel the heat without getting burned.
Oh, actually,
They
I do remember
definitely
this.
accomplished this, as guests regularly complained that they had been burned by the fire, mostly by those that had already had sunburns from a day at the park. The main issue with the original attraction
I
was
do
that
remember
the
that,
water made
actually.
it difficult for the robot sharks to go from a complete standstill to lunging out of the water. Universal decided to hire Oceaneer International, a company specializing in products that assist in deep-sea exploration, to build the sharks. They were able to accomplish this, although the detail
Needs to
of the
get some
sharks does
pasta
not
and
match
some
that of
Yingling.
the original attraction. But who cares about details if you can't see them because the ride is always closed? An interesting aspect of the remodeling was the testing phase, because in order to view changes made to the attraction, the technicians
play
would have
World
to
War
take a
Z, Jimmy.
round trip on the boat as they could not go in reverse. This means that they were taking trip after trip through the ride to witness minor changes. With all of these contractors on board and $40 million later, Universal was able to complete the second version of the attraction for a soft opening in 1993, using the term technical rehearsals until
Thanks to use of
1994.
Absolute and the Bit cigarette. I mean, it was a dog shit ride, though.
No survivors. And you thought this only happened.
Man, I can't believe that dude fucking fell out into the mechanics. That's nuts.
So the final
Hopefully he
version
got
of
his
the
$1 million.
attraction looked like this. As you waited in line, you were taken through the boathouses of Amity, including TV screens
Thanks for
playing
5 gift subs, DJ Lynn. Good to see you.
WJWS13.
And thanks
It had
for
a lot
the
of
Trooper
different
and
programming
Trollbot.
with numerous references to the film and
Bit
other
cigarette
movies as well.
again.
Once you were done waiting in line, you board one of Captain Jake's boats with the skipper to tour the island of Amity. You take off with your tour guide explaining the shark attacks of 1974 that were later turned into a hit movie. They also point out the houses of some of the characters of the Jaws movies, until suddenly they get a call of distress from Amity 3. The skipper tries to see what is going on and finds Amity 3 sinking. Then the guests see
Shark! 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 Shark!
The skipper pulls out the grenade launcher, not realizing that it is actually loaded at first, and fires at the monster.
Oh
missing.
god!
The skipper misses a second time before hiding in a boathouse to wait for Chief Brody. The shark tries to break in, and the skipper struggles to escape, but does just in time. Chief Brody tells the skipper that he'll be there in 10 minutes. The skipper replies
Thanks
with
to
the
two
now
gift subs,
famous
Justin,
line,
and Prime
"We'll
ball
be
out.
shark bait in 10 minutes,"
Resub kiddo.
which doesn't actually make sense since technically they are already shark bait. Anyways, the shark comes back and the skipper misses with the grenade launcher once again, this time accidentally igniting a nearby gas dock. The skipper then explains that they are
Thanks to
going
gift
to
sub,
unload the
Kobe.
guests onto a fishing dock in an attempt
Nah, I
to
wouldn't do
save
that though,
them.
Paul.
However, the shark appears once again, but this time it accidentally bites down on a high voltage power cable, frying it. The guests smell the roasted shark and it makes one final lunge for the boat, but the skipper is able to kill it with the grenade launcher. Everyone cheers as they are returned safely to Amity. All in all, the shark appears 5 times on the starboard
Rest
side
in
and only
peace.
twice on the port side, so you were luckier to be placed on the starboard side. So that was Jaws the ride, but hold on because its history is not over just yet. A few notable events took place with the ride after its second release. First, every year the attraction was drained, and the Department of Environmental Protection was tipped that oil and other toxins from the ride were being irresponsibly disposed of, which essentially just meant that they had to change their fuel type and do a lot of paperwork. In 2004,
I like the idea that they're just
hurricanes
poisoning the
caused
water,
gas
though.
prices to increase in Florida to the point that it was too expensive to operate the Jaws ride, thus causing it to be open only infrequently and seasonally from 2005 to 2007. Also, the attraction was refurbished constantly to ensure that the ride operated correctly. So why was it closed? Unlike other Defunctland entries, this one is pretty simple. Harry Potter. The franchise was going to and
Really?
did save Universal's attendance numbers, and Jaws was replaced with the Diagon Alley attraction, Harry Potter and the
Wait,
Escaping
what?
Gringotts. While the attraction at Universal is gone, there is still a Jaws operating at Universal Studios Japan, and the short scene during the tram tour is still operating.
I thought it was just because it was so fucking boring
So
they
that
said
is
fuck
the
it.
history of Jaws the ride. There are a few more interesting anecdotes to the attraction that I decided weren't relevant enough to discuss here, but if you would like to read more on Jaws, visit the links below. One is to themeparktourist.com, which is where I got the majority of my research for extraterrestrial and Jaws, and the other is to a Reddit AMA by a skipper who worked on the ride. I recommend checking both of these out. As always, to learn more about where the remains of Jaws are today,
Yeah, no, that ride
how I'm going
sucked.
to get them back, and where I will place them in Defunctland, please
Kind of nostalgic though to see it operating.
I'm built differently. I'm built differently.